For years, there's been talk that the United Arab Emirates has the world's best passport, better than Germany, better than Japan, better than Singapore, or any of the other countries that people have long thought had the world's best travel document. And today, I'm going to tell you what convinced me that these people might just be right, that the UAE is number one. We just released the 8th annual edition of the Nomad Passport Index. It's Nomad Capitalist's ranking of which passports are not only best for travel, but are best for tax policy, are best for perception, are best for everything that the person carrying it would want to know. And it's probably been featured in CNBC, the national news, NBC News, and all kinds of newspapers all around the world, Fortune magazine too. And for years, we've seen a couple of other people in this business talk about how the UAE had the best passport. Most people have long looked at only how many visa-free countries a passport holder can go to. It was Nomad Capitalist that came in and said, well, wait a minute, if you're an American and a US passport means if you move overseas, those taxes follow you. Doesn't that make your passport worse than a pretty similar Canadian passport? It limits your freedom. If you're American and the perception of your passport is not quite as good in some places, or if you have another passport where people can like, even though you have good visa-free travel, countries may be a little more reluctant to let you in or grant you residence or open a bank account. Doesn't that make the passport worse? A passport is not just for getting into other countries. It's used in every facet of a global citizen's daily life. And so, our idea was you can't just add up the countries that someone goes to. And when I heard people say, oh, the UAE is number one, my first thought was they were merely fudging the numbers to get themselves a headline. There's a lot of companies in the citizenship space that are based in Dubai, and hey, what better way to get an advantage than to say, hey, you guys are number one. Now, the UAE has had a great policy of getting visa-free travel to a number of smaller countries, emerging countries in their neck of the woods. They have perhaps the best passport in the world outside of regional African passports for being able to go to many, many countries in Africa. They've done a great job negotiating that, much more so than, let's say, the United States or many European countries. The average person's not going to go to some of these smaller African countries, and so the fact that even the number may be higher in some cases, or the fact that you can kind of put together e-visas and visa-free, that just didn't really matter to me. And so I said, this doesn't make sense until this year, when for the first time in our 8-year history of the Nomad Passport Index, my team went and they tweaked the methodology a bit. They said, let's focus on what freedom is. Let's focus on what perception is, and let's focus on what mobility is. They did a great job of refining the data that they use. And who came out as number one in that passport index? None other than the UAE. The US passport fell. It's below pretty much every country in Europe, including countries like Cyprus, including passports like Hong Kong. But the UAE came out number one. And one of the reasons why I've said for years there's no way the UAE can be number one is that the UAE, while it's done an incredible job of getting visa-free travel, they recently got access to Canada. They can go to the UK. They can go everywhere in Europe. They have access to all the Gulf countries, which are rather difficult for most passport holders. They can't go to the United States. And I said to myself, you have about 42 countries that have visa waiver access to the US or Canada, where citizens can just come to the United States. I said, how is it that a country that can't even go to the United States could be number one? Why aren't any of these other 42 countries better than it? And I realized the very purpose of the Nomad Passport Index was that visa-free travel wasn't all that matters. Now, you could certainly make a case for weighting the visa-free travel of the countries and saying, hey, the United States for 99 out of 100 people is going to be more valuable than visa-free access to Cameroon or Mauritania or Djibouti. And yet, to me, this shows a couple of different things. The fact that the UAE passport would be so strong in visa-free travel, even though it's missing, one or two countries like the United States that equally good passports can go to, is number one, it shows that a country like the United States is increasingly irrelevant. Not to say that even in a bad way, but this idea that there's one be-all and end-all country just doesn't make sense anymore. We've seen interest in moving to the United States among millionaires decline by 80%, on top of the fact that more millionaires than almost ever are leaving the United States. So you have a two-pronged attack there. More people are leaving because they just don't feel they're getting the value. More Americans are renouncing citizenship, and a lot fewer people are coming. Meanwhile, property prices in a place like Dubai in the UAE are booming at the same time some places in the US are seeing double-digit property drops. And so this shows that one country just isn't going to control the narrative anymore. And if your passport can't go to one country, that's not the end of the world. I've told you that I've had a number of people who've come to a party or they've been acquaintances, and they were from usually Central American countries or South American countries. And they said, oh, I have a Nicaraguan passport. It's a terrible passport. The reality is a Nicaraguan passport, most of those Central American passports, are actually pretty good. You can go to London, you can go to the UK, you can go to Europe, you can go to a lot of places around the world. But they thought it was bad because in their country and in their culture, the one place they wanted to go was the United States. Okay? Now, we've seen a lot of Mexicans, when they get access to Canada, shifting their interest in moving to Canada. And so, to me, that proves that even though a lot of Mexicans, wealthy Mexicans, the kinds that we work with here at Nomad Capitalist, have historically had an interest in going and living in the United States, whether it's in the Southwest, whether it's in Miami. Other people have had an interest in going to Boston, for example. We've worked with a lot of wealthy Mexicans. But that taste has shifted because they are going where they're treated best. They said, okay, Canada sounds like they're much more welcoming to us now, so let's go there. Now, Donald Trump probably didn't help in their country's mind, but they're saying, hey, here's a country that's open to us. And so we've had to talk pretty much every wealthy Mexican family out of not going to Canada because their goal was, hey, if I'm going to move, I might as well save taxes. You ain't saving taxes moving to Canada. But the point is that your passport can be a pretty good passport on balance, even number one, if it's missing just one country that you don't necessarily have to have. And that millionaires are increasingly overlooking one country where the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So any one country that just says, hey, you know what, we're going to do things the way we've always done them. We don't care if you don't like it. We don't need your business. We don't want your money. Go away. The door is closed. That country is going to increasingly be irrelevant. Number two, the UAE shows that your passport and the benefits to citizens can dramatically improve in terms of perception, in terms of being welcomed, by having a government that actually listens and that is actually smart. When you look at some of the people who are in charge of, let's say, ministries in the UAE, they hire people from the private sector, they hire smart people. When we opened up shop, when we started looking for some folks in Dubai, we've got a very small group of people in Dubai. But when we first started looking at resumes from people who live there, I would help them initially, and it would say, oh, this guy worked for the roads department. Oh, this guy worked for some government. We don't want government workers. And I had to be corrected by a very wealthy client of ours who lived there. No. Oftentimes, those are the smartest people. They bring in people for these high-level positions who actually know something because they want to make their country work better. They're not just closing their ears and saying, hey, this is how we've always done it. Why should we change? They're saying, hey, what are you doing that's working? What are you doing that's working? What's working over there? And they're taking the best of all that exists and putting it together. And so I know people who, they're friends with the minister of this or that, and they're very successful business people. You probably wouldn't have that to the same extent in the West when you just make some random person with no experience the minister of this or that. And so it shows that government that's aggressive in expanding rights for its citizens, expanding the ability to travel, being smart, makes the passport much better. And number three, it shows that low taxes or zero taxes in the case of the UAE matters at a time when the West wants to raise them. Again, the Nomad Passport Index just isn't how well are you going to travel. The UAE is going to add a new 9% tax on corporations who are doing business locally. They were basically pushed to do it. However, there are still free zones you can do business in, and if you want to start a business, there are different free zones. We help people figure out which one's the best for them all the time. We help people move to all different kinds of countries around the world, including the UAE. But certainly salaries, certainly personal income continues to be taxed at zero, and that is not under attack right now. So the UAE has found a great way to keep the rest of the world happy, while also offering options for new people to come in who aren't doing business locally and keep basically zero tax policy. Everyone gets to live there and pay zero tax. And so that's great for residents. But certainly if you're a citizen with a passport, that's even better. So they've done a great job expanding the passport. And while I still believe that if you were to have a weighted index just of visa-free travel, sure, Germany might come out just ahead or Japan might come out just ahead because again, the US does have an impact for people, and that is worth more than going to, random places that most people aren't going to go to. But when you add in the other factors that the Nomad Passport Index does, it really shows you that countries that you didn't think would catch up can catch up. When I was a kid, you'd turn on television and the late night comedy shows would be making fun of two things that I remember. Number one, you'd have a Hyundai or a Kia and you'd fill up the gas tank and it would double in value. That was one joke. The other joke is they'd kind of poke fun at Dubai. They'd poke fun at Abu Dhabi. It was kind of a joke back then. Nobody's really laughing now. You have some of the biggest businesses in the world. You have smart entrepreneurs. You have billionaires. They're moving to Dubai. They're moving to the UAE. Real estate markets, from what I see, they catch up very fast. Prices have shot through the roof. We've been telling you about that for the last year. In just the last 2 years, I mean, you've seen prices more than double in most places in Dubai. That's why prices have surged. You're starting to see migration patterns pick up because a lot of people have just gone to Dubai and bought kind of a plan B property. Now you're increasingly seeing after the pandemic, after crazy tax raises in Western countries, after countries restricting freedoms more and more, people are saying, all right, I'm going to actually live there. And so you can tell at first when a country is really picking up by its real estate market, and then you can see who's actually moving there. Both of those things have done very well. Now, I'm not here to say that the UAE is the one and only place for you to live. It could play part of it, where let's say you want to live in Europe, you want to live in Asia, you want to live anywhere, you want to be a nomad. Hey, the UAE is not the worst place to plant your company flag. It's not the best place for everybody, but it's one of the contenders. If you like the idea of living there, you can live there part-time, you can live there full-time, you've got great tax benefits. You could be a resident for immigration, you could be a resident for tax, you could be both, right? And so you're probably not going to be a citizen. That is the one part that is difficult. But you can still take advantage of the conditions that made it great. But the bigger angle, whether the UAE is the place for you or not, is that passports that you never thought would ever be worth anything are now in the upper echelons. They're better than the US, better than Canada, better than the UK, better than the countries where you can't even get into your country or leave due to an emergency that the country declares. Countries that don't let you give up your citizenship in the West because, hey, we're closed for business. Sorry, you don't get to exercise your rights. Countries that threaten to take your passports because you do something that the government in charge doesn't like. Those countries are going down, and the countries that 20 years ago we were all laughing at are coming up. One of them is now number one, and while you may never get that passport, it shows that going where you're treated best pays a lot more dividends than staying in a legacy brand country that's no longer working as well.